Hey everyone, it's Susan Pierce Thompson and welcome to the weekly vlog. This week I want to address Rosetta. Rosetta sent in a long email, so I'm not going to read it. It was pages. But the question is fascinating and it's just a really cool topic for a vlog. So she posed the question at the beginning, which is, Susan, you talk about, and your theory of bright line eating or your program really addresses food addiction as something that happens in certain people's brains. But she said, does eating too much in that way always need to be the result of food addiction in the brain, or could it be the result of calorie restriction and deprived eating conditions over a period of time, for example, in one's childhood or coming of age, or I guess at any point during their life, but restricted eating as opposed to food addiction in the brain. And then she describes, a lot of deprivation in terms of food in her childhood, where she, had a thyroid condition and wasn't allowed to eat much because the doctor said that she would just gain weight if she ate too much. So she was basically, starved, essentially, like not allowed to eat as many calories as her body wanted and needed, and that set up a compulsive overeating cycle, what she's calling a compulsive overeating cycle. So what I want to say, Rosetta, is actually, I think in most people's case, that's where food addiction comes from. I think what you're talking about is the origin story of garden variety food addiction. I think for most of us, we started dieting at some point because we got the idea that we were too heavy. Maybe we were too heavy, but in any case, we got the idea that we were too heavy, and we started trying to restrict our intake. And that is, the research is very clear on this, that dieting leads to overeating later. And so in your case, it was, imposed from the outside of you. It was, your doctors and parents and whoever was, they were the people that were, making you eat less food. But either way, the body doesn't care who's making that decision. The result is that it threw your system out of whack. I do think some people come by food addiction just by eating too much sugar and flour. And certainly we're seeing more and more of that now as sugar has completely saturated our food environment, and kids are now, the first ingredient in baby formula is, corn syrup. First ingredient, just appalling. But I think that restriction is certainly in the mix of the origin story of just about all food addiction. So I do hear you that it feels different to you because the restriction, and you talk about this sort of voice inside that is defensive and panicked about anybody taking away your food, and that comes from your earliest childhood, like, don't take away my food, you can't make me eat less food, and this sort of inner sort of dragon that rears up trying to protect your ability to eat the food that you need to eat. And I can see how that would come up in a childhood like the one you described. But Rosetta, what I want to say is that I don't actually think that your brain is any different from the brains that I describe, and I'm sorry about that. I don't think that's what you wanted to hear, but I think that you may have come by it in in the way you did, but I think that that's actually a pretty standard story of the development of food addiction. So anyway, yeah, it is interesting how the interplay of food restriction combined with access to sugar and flour and addictive foods, it's an explosive combination, and it sounds like you've had both in your background. So I guess, Rosetta, what I wanted to say is I do think there are some people who reach peace that they're comfortable with by going the route of just healing, doing the inner work, and coming to lay off of all restriction altogether. And they go a path of intuitive eating or competent eating. There's different names for that. They rarely, in my experience, end up very slender, but they form a peace with it, just comfort in their bodies, and it works for them. I tried that and wasn't very successful at it for myself. But I do know people who have reached a peace by going that route. So I don't think you need to do bright line eating necessarily to find some kind of peace. In my experience, to get the full benefits of being, at a weight that is going to maximize longevity and maximize health. And for me personally, I was not comfortable being heavy. I didn't have peace if I was overweight. I wasn't happy that way. And in order for me to kind of have all the pieces in place that worked for me, I've found that I've had to do, the bright line eating method, obviously, right? That's why I'm here doing all this. But I do think it's possible to get some kind of peace going a different method. You didn't really ask me about that, but I kind of sensed it in your question. So anyway, yeah, I do think that food addiction comes from an amalgam of food restriction and access to addictive foods. And the interplay of those drives us basically crazy in the brain in all the ways that I talk about in all my videos. So yeah, Rosetta, those are my thoughts. I don't think that your background is that different from most people's, actually. I mean, certainly the stuff you describe in your childhood is very unique to you. And I think that part of your healing journey is obviously going to involve unpacking that and doing the inner work on that stuff. And I honor you for writing in and sharing your journey with me and giving me the topic for this vlog about compulsive overeating and whether it can come from something other than the food addiction that I describe. And mostly I think no. I think it's really food addiction that's in play there. So anyway, that's the weekly vlog. I hope that was helpful, Rosetta. And if you have a question you would like me to address on the weekly vlog, go ahead and send it in. I'm at Susan@brightlineeating.com, and I'll see you next week.